in the middle of acknowledging that the Indigenous community has much to offer the rest of us, and it hasn't been adequately, the wisdom of that community has not been adequately accessed as yet. So may I acknowledge our Lord Mayor, Sally Capp, who's with us this evening, and all of you people who've come out to hear a very special presentation. It pleases me immensely that during our 10th Knowledge Week, big thinkers, Australian and international, come to our city to both inspire us and create opportunities for our community to reflect on our shared future. And tonight, our big thinker, of course, is Raina Kumra, who joins us sharing her passion for technology and sharing her insights into the new techno-led world. A rare combination she has, I've discovered, having had a look at what she's been writing about. So it's a rare combination to have such a command of the technology and yet understand it in a very social way. Now, all big thinkers arise somewhere, obviously, and it's likely that everybody here who's chosen to come and listen to Raina have Googled her, as I did. And so forgive me if I'm repeating that which you already know, but let me tell you, for those who haven't Googled, that Raina grew up in California's Silicon Valley, and I believe she lives near there now too. And wow, I wondered to myself, is growing up in that environment some sort of determinant? Do Silicon Valley kids absorb the capacity to innovate by osmosis in some way, effortlessly crunching algorithms from birth, automatically setting off on a career path to squillions on software creation? Of course they must. I wondered quite where Raina's phenomenon, her thinking, grew, because there's such a, I would imagine in a place like Silicon Valley, there's such a sort of group think must happen, that how hard it must be to think in an alternative way to the press of the creation in one particular direction. In such a pro-tech place as Silicon Valley, I wondered about what might have triggered Raina's questioning mindset and her subsequent career trajectory. And whatever it is, I'm ever so grateful that it happened. Raina is the director of the Omidyar Network, so described Alternative Investment and Business Group. She worked at the world's largest international media organisation, Broadcasting Board of Governors, and she worked with the US State Department. Lucky thing with the Obama administration, advancing the cause. And it was kind of interesting to read that it's described as the cause, innovation and new techno invention. And she worked with innovation and new media. I don't see it as a cause myself, but anyway, during her diverse and distinguished career advancing the cause, Raina observed techno companies tended not to perceive or anticipate or engage at all with problems that arose with these marvellous new emerging technologies. Worse still, they failed to solve or factor in the impact of such evident problems before these problems turned into, this term is a Raina term, and I think it's great, before these problems turned into freight trains. Now, to quote Raina, makers, and I would actually myself say marketers, makers of new technology must be more empathetic and compassionate when building things and not just focus on money and fame. With great power, and heaven knows they've got that, with great power comes great responsibility. So let's try and remind them of that. We would all agree that technologies certainly have power, and this cautionary note in relation to new technologies resonates very strongly with me, most acutely, I would say, during Knowledge Week each year. At a gala dinner last night, the CEO of our major telco company remarked that the rapid emergence of new technologies will never again be as slow as it is today. Think about that. And I don't think he was all that worried about it. But anyway, it upset me. Never again will it be as slow as it is today. Wow, I found this very startling, but, absolutely credible. And it's a worry for me. So what are the implications of this for Melbourne? We're not Silicon Valley, of course, but when I think about Melbourne, I see that we've been ever forward-thinking and a creative place ever since the 19th century, when Europe knew Melbourne as the modern city. You can hardly believe it, but it's true. Over our short history, successive generations of energetic, extraordinarily inventive, entrepreneurial people have pushed our prosperity along. Sure, we've had gold and migration and isolation from the rest of the world, and all of that helped. But really, then and now, we've attracted talent, and the pattern continues to drive our vibrant knowledge economy. Startups, innovators, entrepreneurs are all drawn here, driving the knowledge economy. And all of this is largely based on rapidly emerging and evolving technologies, so shaping our future right here in Melbourne. And who's watching it? Who's watching this space? I admit, as chair of Knowledge City, it's very easy to be beguiled by the blue sky, the buzz of perpetual technological, the new, and who amongst us doesn't enjoy all the whiz-bang that's out there in our hub right now? It's terrific, isn't it? It's good. Yes, it is, isn't it? But should we pause and examine the process, the consequences intended or otherwise? Should we jump onto the Raina freight train? Should we not worry about it? Or should we try to slow it? Or should we just get out of its way? I don't know where. But let's just think about that as we listen to Raina. Now, the broad objective of Knowledge Week each year is to engage with the knowledge sector stakeholders and, more importantly, allow the community to engage with them too, to glimpse what the new is and actually experience it. And all of this, of course, allows us to foster informed interrogation and reflection about not always accepting the new, but having a look at what else there might be. The theme of this year's conference or week all together has been, what if? So what if emerging technologies are not taking us where we want to go? Melbourne's a savvy town. We like to think here, and by thinking in a critical way, we'll shape this town to where we want it to go. So what fun it's going to be listening to Raina and starting to think. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for thinking. We need a bit of technical help, do we?
This is Lookout, a new camera that looks ahead so you can keep looking down. Finally, you can see what's in front of you without ever having to look up from your phone. Lookout is enabled by a breakthrough camera system which allows the lens to tilt forward and constantly stream your immediate surroundings to an intelligent overlay at the top of your screen. A visionary awareness algorithm is what alerts the Lookout display to activate whenever your attention is split between your phone and your life, so you know you can feel free to keep your eye off the ball. At last, you can drive to work while you read the morning paper, or go sightseeing while you catch up on email. Basically, you never have to do this anymore. You hear people say that we look down at our phones too much. But what if the problem isn't that we're all looking down? What if the problem is that we ever have to look up at all? Don't look up, look out.
So who thought that was real, even for just a few seconds? Don't be ashamed. Raise your hand. How did we get here? How did we get to this place where we constantly have our noses in our phones? We are scrolling through a version of life while missing out on real life. It's affecting our relationships. How did we get here? I'll tell you, because part of it is my fault. In 2002, I joined the digital advertising agency. This was the dawn of the programmatic era. It was the beginning of collecting data on consumers so that we could serve them with personal ads. I worked at Wieden & Kennedy. I worked at Bartle Bogle Hegarty, Ogilvy. I worked across brands like Nike, Johnny Walker, Match.com. And we had a lot of money and a lot of different ways of serving you ads. And we thought, this is perfect. We've solved a massive business problem. We are now finally going to be able to give people what they want. Instead of getting random ads, they're going to get ads for the things that they like. Did it work? Were you guys also happy about it? We didn't think through the unintended consequences. Fast forward to today, where behind me is just a small sampling of maybe 10, 20 minutes worth of browsing across Facebook and Instagram for one shoe brand that thinks that I want to buy it, but I really don't. It's very annoying. But how could we have known that this is what we were doing, ruining online content forever? The best minds of my generation are thinking about how to make people click ads. This is Jeff Hammerbacher. He's the CEO of Cloudera and a former Facebook employee. And he left because he didn't want to participate in this economy anymore. Advertising was the only logical model to fund online media, and it persisted and continues to this day. But it is also the reason why today companies like Google and Facebook, Uber, Amazon, all have more information about us than we do, and they know better what we want than ourselves. This is my favorite Einstein quote. Albert Einstein knew a thing or two about dangerous technology. We learned to live with nuclear technology, something that could have destroyed us all in a responsible way. Maybe the tech industry can do something similar. Right now, we're going to go through a little fast forward and rewind because a lot of really great intentions have existed and formed some of the wonderful technology that is around us every day. But there are people full of regret. Ethan Zuckerman invented the pop-up ad. He's an academic at MIT and an internet activist, and he is deeply sorry because it is one of the worst things that has ever happened to the internet. But he says, and I'm putting him in a pop-up now, he says that it was something really brave and noble that they were trying to do, and now we're forced to explain our actions, reminding everyone of our good intentions. But really, it was a fiasco, and we need to own up to that. Justin Rosenstein was the inventor of the like button. In 2007, they launched this feature, which had once been called the awesome button. It was awesome in many ways. Really what it was a metrics tool, and it allowed people to stop writing comments like, I like this so much, this photo is great, and just serve it with one button. He has actually removed the app from his phone. Let me say that again. The inventor has removed the app from his phone because he fears the psychological effects that it has had on him, his family, and the world over, people who are now addicted to technology. How many of us have been really bummed out when we've posted a photo and not gotten a lot of likes? We've all experienced that. And it's been designed that way for us to be addicted to it. It's important to note that Silicon Valley's highest C-suite executives do not let their children anywhere near the stuff because they know that technology is only there to serve shareholder value and sell ads. Most of them send their kids to schools that are in the woods, that have no technology anywhere near them, and that's the way they're raising their kids. As evil as Mark Zuckerberg is painted these days, I am absolutely sure he did not intend to destroy democracy when he set out. I think it was more along the lines of trying to find a date. The startup Strava, which was founded in 2009, was a very easy way for cyclists and joggers to share route information. It had an actual great unintended effect of helping city planners understand which routes users wanted to go on, and that's where they would spend their money and pave that and leave behind another route. But because they had a default in their app that allowed geomapping of every user that was switched to on, the unintended consequence was when service members in the US Army were using it to go on their runs and do their exercise around secret Army bases, revealed military intelligence and revealed these locations. The founders of Joule actually were two Stanford design students who were smokers, and they really wanted to find a way to deliver nicotine in a smokeless manner to stop cancer from occurring. Then they took outside funding, a lot of capital, and their incentives changed. And then they began doing something really, really evil. They began marketing to teenagers. They began serving ads to youth. They then flavored their vaping cartridges in candy flavors and fruity flavors, things that would be very attractive to young users. And yes, they achieved their goal. They are worth $16 billion, but they're also in a lot of trouble. They are one of the most hated Silicon Valley entities right now because everyone who's a tech investor and has a teenager has a child who is addicted to vaping, partly because of Joule's conquest for scale. A lot of designers and coders were in their 20s when they were creating these things, and they didn't have kids. Now they have them, and they are rethinking their design decisions. I was speaking with Tony Fadell a few weeks ago about this very notion of regret. And he has a lot of regret, and he's worked really hard on his company to make sure that they don't make the same mistakes. But a lot of it had to do with maturity. And the people that were designing apps in their 20s and now have children are coming back and saying, oh, wait a second. I need to rethink this. This isn't going to work. YouTube did not want to share nightmares, I'm sure. The origin story for YouTube actually goes back to Janet Jackson and Justin Timberlake and their 2004 Super Bowl halftime show and wardrobe malfunction. An employee at PayPal was looking desperately for that clip to share, and then so was birthed YouTube. And again, YouTube is especially not designed with children in mind. It was designed for office bros to share videos and laugh. Now, when you go onto YouTube, and especially YouTube Kids, you can find content that has slipped through the filters that is deeply disturbing. I have a 3- and 5-year-old, and I don't let them anywhere near YouTube Kids or YouTube. You will find things like Paw Patrol, heads getting severed, you'll find Peppa Pig getting tortured. It's really worrisome. Let's see what former President Obama has to say about this.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time.
Jordan Peele created this fake video of President Obama to demonstrate how easy it is to put words in someone else's mouth.
Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet.
Not everyone bought it, but the technology behind such frauds is rapidly improving, even as worries increase about their potential for harm. This is your Bloomberg Quick Take on deepfakes. Deepfakes, or realistic-looking fake videos and audio, gained popularity as a means of adding famous actresses into porn scenes. Despite bans on major websites, they remain easy to make and find. They're named for the deep learning artificial intelligence algorithms that make them possible. Input real audio or video of a specific person, the more the better, and the software tries to recognize patterns in speech and movement. Introduce a new element like someone else's face or voice, and a deepfake is born.
It's actually extremely easy to make one of these things. There were just some breakthroughs from academic researchers who work with this particular kind of machine learning in the past few weeks, which would drastically reduce the amount of video you need actually to create one of these.
Programs like FakeApp, the most popular and widely available for making deep fakes, need dozens of hours of human assistance to create a video that looks like this rather than this. In August, researchers at Carnegie Mellon revealed software that accurately rendered not just facial features, but changing weather patterns and flowers in bloom.
So how is YouTube going to keep up with this? There are 400 hours of content uploaded to YouTube every minute, and their filters already are not working. And if we're worried about being in a post-fact world, people can now take these deep fakes and manufacture anything they want. They can put people in a place where they weren't. They can create alibis. This is something to think about as we move forward. History is littered with people with pure intentions. It doesn't work all by itself. We need to work a little harder and have a little more personal discipline. And this is something that I am very, very always hammering home with everyone in Silicon Valley, with all the teams. This is not something that you outsource. As users, we also have a responsibility, and we should know our place in this trillion-dollar ecosystem that we have helped create with our data and our data trails. And we need to be less naive about what actually social media companies are after. It is sometimes really hard to understand just how big of a threat there is around us. And sometimes we can only focus on what's in front of us. It's hard to wrap your head around something as complex as climate change, and it's hard to wrap your head around what's happening with social technology today. But that's not an excuse. We still need to do it, and we can't wait for someone else to fix the problem, because they're not going to. We also need to realize that tech is life or death. It seems so fun and frou-frou and not really consequential, but people are dying. Teen suicides related to cyberbullying have doubled since 2018 in the US. We need to wake up and understand that this is not just small stuff. And yes, selfie deaths, not a lot of them, but 275 people have died trying to take a selfie. This is also an indescribable thing that we never would have thought would happen, but people are motivated to do silly things. Distracted driving, online radicalization, destruction of democracy. All of these things are serious and need to be dealt with seriously. I'll tell you a quick story about a bridge collapse in Canada. In 1907, in Quebec, one of the largest cantilever bridge projects in the world was taking place, and the engineers could not get information to each other in time, and the bridge collapsed, killing 75 workers. The civil engineering community at that time came together and said, we are not going to let this happen again. What can we do to ensure that we take more responsibility, because people are dying? So upon graduation, they begin this ceremony called the Order of the Engineer's Ring. And this ring is given to every graduating civil engineer in Canada, and they wear it on their drafting hand to remind them of the weight and the consequence and the responsibility of their profession. And the ring is fabled to be made out of the same steel of that bridge. I thought I'd make one for Facebook employees. What do you think? I am not an ethicist. I am not a futurist, and I still figured out a path forward between right and wrong and flexing a muscle of foresight. You don't need an expert to come in and tell you what the answer is. These are not decisions to outsource. Every single person on a team who is a maker needs to understand their part in this, and everyone who's a user also has to understand their part in this. So I helped create this tool called the Ethical OS, and the way I came to it is I was fundraising for my startup that I had for 4 years in Palo Alto, and I must have pitched 80 investors, got 78 no's, and and then realized sort of some time later that ethics never came up once. No one asked how we were treating the personal user data. None of these investors cared about that. And I was sort of in the back of my mind like, that seems strange, because in most professions you do consider consequence for society. Later, when I became an entrepreneur in residence at an investment shop in Silicon Valley, I began talking to more entrepreneurs, more engineers, early and late stage companies, and I heard the same thing. I heard the same two things, actually. One, well, ethics makes me feel judged, so we tried to find a different word. And the other was, we can't do this. We don't know how. We're not experts. But if someone had a guide, we could probably follow it. We'd certainly use it. So I made one. It's Ethical OS. And I'll take you through some of the things that we can do to sort of mitigate the harms of technology and ensure that future technology that's created isn't created in quite the same way of thoughtlessness around social consequence. I took the format of a checklist because I love this book, The Checklist Manifesto. And in it, Atul Gawande, who was a doctor turned author, wrote about a very simple thing, that checklists save lives in an operating room. When checklists are used, lives are saved. When they are not used, human error occurs. And he also made another point, that we have more information now than we have ever had to solve any problem that we ever need, but we often forget to use it. So I'm going to take you through 8 quick lessons from the Ethical OS. Number 1, collect only as much data as you need and no more. Mozilla really pushes this with their lean data practices. If you want to find out more about that, that's where I would go. But why would you ever want to be responsible for more data than you need? Because if you collect it, you have to protect it. Number 2, ensure your product spreads only truthful content. This is very, very hard to do in a user-generated platform, but it is especially necessary if you care about democracy. Number 3, can you explain your terms of service to a 9-year-old? Or in my case, to my mom? This is one of the biggest abused norms in the tech industry today, making people sign up for things that they just don't quite understand. Researchers discovered recently that it would take 78 days to read the terms of service for the average number of apps that someone has on their phone. So you shouldn't make it so difficult for people to understand what is the implicit and complicit arrangement that they are entering into when they click accept. Number 4, have a diverse team to make a better product. One of the biggest knucklehead examples of Silicon Valley is a team called Bodega. It's a failed startup. They didn't end up raising, but they brilliantly named their vending machine concept that they were going to put on every corner in New York, Bodega. That was highly insensitive because they are planning on putting out the mom and pop grocery stores on every corner, small businesses, and they were planning to wipe them out with something of the same name. So a diverse team would have easily prevented that, and it's shown over and over, diverse teams are always stronger and make better decisions. Number 5, don't design for the dark side. What does this mean? Endless patterns of click holes and traps that are full of attention and getting people to click on things and buy things accidentally or sign up for newsletters. These are all dark patterns in UX design. So if you're a designer, make sure you're not designing just for some empty metrics. Do the design that serves the user the best. Speaking of metrics, you are what you measure. And the metrics have been flawed. This is one of the biggest issues that we have. We've been measuring attention. We've been measuring daily active users, monthly active users, We've been measuring time on site. None of these actually have any value. All they do is help investors map to what they see could be the next Uber or Facebook. They're just looking for scale, and it doesn't really give us much to go off of. So what if you measured something healthier? What if you measured, I don't know, profit? What if you measured revenue? What if you actually were able to sell something and make money and not have to take outside investment? Or what if you measured something like quality of conversation? What if you measured something like civility? What if you measured something that spun things in a positive way and helped hack the world back to something better? Number 7, try to break your product. Because if you don't, someone else will, and they'll run off with the keys, and they'll run off with your users' data, and you will be in trouble, and people won't trust you ever again. It's always good to red team a product, and it's always good to design a kill function. Adopt a personal practice of foresight. So this is actually really easy. All you have to do is ask a couple of questions at team meetings, ask a couple of questions of investors, and just try to practice and build what we all have, a skill we all have, but this muscle of foresight. It's like we all missed a day in school, but it's something that we definitely need to do in a world that we're in right now. So to recap, collect less data, spread truthful information, simplify your terms, have a diverse team, don't design for the dark side, find better metrics, try to break your product, and practice foresight daily. Get out your phones, please, because I would love you to take a photo of this and take it to your teams and work with other people who care about this, take it to students, and even as users. This is really important. If you take nothing else, take this. So what about users? Baratunde Thurston is a good friend of mine, and he is an activist on the internet. He is also a comedian, and he's the former editor of The Onion and worked at The Daily Show. He wrote a handy little guide called How to Do a Data Detox in a Zillion Easy Steps that takes you through a truly frightening data detox that he did himself. So a couple of quick lessons from that. If you have apps and you haven't checked the default on your phone, you might be geolocated right now. You might be being tracked. So turn the defaults from on to off. Secure your network, because Wi-Fi networks are very insecure. And not using a VPN will also allow this tracking to occur. And create demand for alternatives. Choose wisely the products you let into your life and onto your phone, because you'll spend a lot of time with them. Know your part in contributing to this trillion-dollar economy, and don't be naive. Read a couple of terms of service. Not all of them, because no one has 78 days, but read a few and see what you find. Silicon Valley is not all rainbows and unicorns. The streets are not paved with gold, and while there are a lot of millionaires and billionaires, actually the most per capita in all of the world right now, there are more homeless people than San Francisco has ever seen. 7,500 currently homeless people in San Francisco. When I was with my startup, I experienced things that I had never experienced anywhere else, not working in the Obama administration, not working in advertising in New York. And I was discriminated against raising funds as a mother, as a brown woman, and occasionally pregnant. I experienced bias, and I experienced inequity. This happens actually more frequently than you can guess in Silicon Valley. It is not a place that is human first. It is about people coming with a gold rush mentality. Shares, vesting, schedules kind of determine how long people will stay. And they are there to raise funds and get rich quick and get out. And when has that ever been good for society or community? It's not a great place. It's not a place to look up to. Instead, Melbourne, you are amazing. Look around. Look at the people next to you, the brilliant minds in this room. This city has everything it takes, including fantastic coffee that I cannot stop drinking, to create the next possible trillion-dollar startup. You can do it better here. You can look around and see who's not in the room and design for them, and you can put ethical norms in place in your community for technology development. Silicon Valley can't, but you can. Thank you.
Hi. Well done. Where do you want to sit?
Oh, yeah, just go over here. Hi.
Well, thank you, Raina. My name's Claire Ferris-Miles. I'm the Director of City Strategy and Place at the City of Melbourne. So on behalf of the City, I wanted to, first of all, thank you for joining us for Melbourne Knowledge Week. And this is really an opportunity, we've got some time now for you to ask questions. I'm sure there's lots of questions from this fantastic presentation. So there's a couple of people with mics on either side. If you wanted to raise your, or find someone, raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. Are there any immediate questions, or I'll kick off one just to get us started? We've got one from the Lord Mayor. Okay, I'll go with one first. So interestingly enough, the theme of Melbourne Knowledge Week is what if, and a lot of your presentation was effectively a challenge to the tech industry to pause to ask that question about what would happen, where would we go. What is the incentive in a fast-paced world for tech companies to pause?
It's a great question, because even after all the breaches that Facebook has had, their share price still soars. So we'll need to have different models and different incentive structures put in place. And there's a few people working on that, like the long-term stock exchange that just launched, for example, that doesn't value the quarterly system, but values the long-term system. Because Facebook isn't going to be the next generation's choice. So they won't be around forever, and also, we don't trust them anymore.
So would you say that you're an optimist, that,
Yes.
that things will self-select out, or self-select in?
I think as an entrepreneur and an investor, I'm an internal optimist, or I couldn't do anything. But I have seen signals of change. 2 years ago, if we tried to have this conversation in Silicon Valley, it was like pushing a rock up a hill. But now people are engaged and they're thinking about it in ways that they hadn't before. And I think it all starts with a conversation. It all starts with just asking a few simple questions.
Great, thank you. So I think we've got a question here from the Lord Mayor. We've got
I had a similar question, so similar theme. I wondered, one, are you allowed back into Silicon Valley? What's it like being a contrarian in front of the freight train? And you touched on some of the elements of what I took away, let's use technology for good instead of evil. But in that design phase, how do you stay true to the good and not get tempted into the evil? How can we go about encouraging more of that?
It's actually good for business. It's really healthy for your business not to be preying on users and instead be designed to help them, designed with them in mind. As many companies that have had breaches, we've had like 10 major breaches, they've all lost trust, and their boards and their investors have not been happy with them because there's a brand cost to these mistakes. So if you don't make these mistakes, you'd be in a better position, ideally. So that's sort of where foresight comes into the business argument a little bit.
Got a question down the front here.
Hi. With the balkanization of the internet between like Russia and China and America, where should Australia and Melbourne position itself in that landscape? Should we be sliding one way or another, or making some attempt to, I guess, meet all markets?
Maybe just do it your own way, not have to side with either, which I think Australia is pretty good at, from what I've seen.
And so maybe you finished the presentation with talking about Melbourne. So in your time since you've been visiting here, what do you, in terms of our tech industry, what do you think are the strengths that we have that we should nurture and hold on to as our city grows?
From what I've seen and what I know, first of all, you have a Knowledge Week, which is amazing in the information age. I don't know any other city that has a festival of knowledge and learning. I think that's fantastic. There's also the fact that it's a very creative city. You can feel the heartbeat of creativity in here. And that is going to be the edge and the advantage, because if you're creative, you can solve problems in a way that no one else can. So you'll always win.
Thank you.
Thanks. We've got a question in the middle.
You talked about a number of examples. You talked about a number of examples where either inadvertently or by design, founders have taken the evil path, let's say, or have done the wrong thing. What are some examples of startups that are adopting the ethical OS or are designing for good?
So we have spent a lot of time working with incubators and accelerators, because it's a lot easier to impact the products that are in the design phase and not the ones that are already out there with a business model and with investors who are breathing down their neck. So once you take outside money, it's harder to make these changes. But when you're young and you're sort of thinking through, like, what are all the what ifs of this product? What are all the things that this could be? That's the right time for, I think, maximum impact. So that's where I've seen things really work well. And you know, any of the startups that are in the world today, that are pre-seed, that are very, very early, they could very well be the dominating force for us in the next few years. So I think that's really important for the future.
We'll go with one of the questions at the front here. Got a microphone there? Oh, I've got a mic here. Sorry, can't see you. Go for it.
Thanks. First of all, thanks for a great presentation, really illuminating. I'm a civil engineer, and I haven't got the ring to it, but
you should get one.
It was a pretty ugly ring, so
yeah.
you can tell it was designed by an engineer. The question I had, though, is I'm an engineer, and we still have failures. We have fewer of them, hopefully, but you still have bridges that fail.
Mm-hmm.
And the pharmaceutical industry still has drugs that fail some users. But both those industries have fairly mature, in most parts of the world, have fairly mature regulatory frameworks, intervention opportunities. Is there a time, or have you seen anywhere in the world, where Facebook needs to be subject to a clinical trial before they go to market and plant, health issues, public health issues in society?
So just so I understand your question, is there an example where this is happening in technology?
Obviously an example, or is there a place for regulation?
Yeah, so regulation and legislation, well, first of all, I don't think anyone wants this administration regulating anything. So what I have sort of really been pitching is self-regulation, governance, corporate governance, because most of these tech boards are toothless. They can't do anything because the way the founders have arranged the share and voting value. But some of them can, and I think that's our best chance for quick regulation, is these boards come and actually start doing something instead of just sitting around and debating.
Thanks. Question, one down here, thank you.
Yeah, how you doing? Thanks very much for the talk. Question in regards to sort of what that lady said before with like not going over the dark side and thinking about like foresight. So for an example, you talked about the Facebook guy who invented the like button and how that caused a lot of negative like mental health effects. But in a sense, if still keeping track of the comments, wouldn't people still be upset with their lack of comments, irrespective if the like button was there or not? So how do you foresee something like that happening? Like what sort of things would you look for?
So I think the like button, the problem, and you can't always foresee everything, but you can try. You can foresee one or two things if you try. But the like button was a metrics tool, and it was really to speed up interactions. And the more interactions, the better, because they have a better metrics to present to their investors. And so their share price will be higher, and their world domination will continue. But I think there is something about, sure, you can't predict everything that goes wrong, but you can get better at solving problems faster that you've caused. And that's not happening either. There's a lot of, oh, well, it wasn't my fault, but maybe someone else can fix it, kind of attitude going on.
Okay, I think there's a question over on this side.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me? Is it on?
Yep.
Yeah. I grew up in the pre-digital age in my business career, and it's fascinated me how companies have attained the value they have in this market with no tangible assets at all. Yeah. And you're smiling.
And no profit.
No profit.
And no profit either. And you mentioned profit in your presentation. So when does the bubble burst, and does it burst into another bubble? What do you see as the transition? Because at some stage investors, and I've worked with venture capital, at some stage investors are going to want their return and move on to the next thing. So how does this bubble develop, and does it burst, or does it morph into another bubble?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of bright spots coming up in the world today. One of them is the zebra movement. So instead of trying to create unicorns, they want to create zebras, which are more balanced. They're black and white. They consider a lot more things. And it's a movement led by female entrepreneurs and investors who don't think that we need to pursue scale at all costs. It's really not about scale. It could be about some other metric. So there are some movements on the fringe that are coming into the picture that I think could help burst that bubble, because you need an alternate, if the bubble's going to burst, for something else to grow.
Interestingly, on Uber, I think they just said a few weeks ago, down here, sorry, that they may never make a profit. So I find that very interesting that they're worth so much. Yeah. My question's around, do you think we're at a point now, or in the future we'll be at a point where there'll be apathy from companies around not being too concerned about hacks into their databases and data being stolen? Because share prices of companies before that happened, yes, it'll drop immediately when that happens, and a little bit after. They tend to recover and are higher than afterwards. You see your esteemed president getting away with saying things that are factually dubious. And you see here as well, we had a Royal Commission into banking, and the findings out of that were horrendous, yet the share prices are way above what they were before such an investigation. Do you think we're at a point now, or will we in the future, where there's just apathy from companies around concerns like that?
Yeah, I think we are. We have been at that point frequently, and there's apathy from consumers. There's apathy from users. They're like, well, they already have everything anyway, so why should I bother? But apathy isn't going to solve the problem. It's consumer demand that is the only lever left to press. So if we all make better choices, if we all demand more of the technology that is being served to us, I think there can be a big dent made.
Okay, I think we've still got one more question at the front.
Raina, you talked a lot about social technologies in your presentation. One of the fastest growing areas of tech now is in urban and ambient technologies and smart cities. As one of the kind of emerging areas that is likely to have a huge impact on our lives, how do you think some of these ethical practices can be built into that work?
Yeah, this is exciting, because similarly to working with early stage entrepreneurs, working with early stage pillars of technology, sort of new industries emerging, those are our best bet to instate some ethical infrastructure or change the norms or set in motion how something will or will not be governed. So it's actually the best place, I think, to make sure that we don't end up in the same place where we are today. And pretty soon, the next generation after that, they're not going to have devices. Everything's going to be implants or just around them. And so this is our next best chance to shift things.
Great, thank you. Is there any more questions? Got one more here, yep.
I didn't want to just start talking. Thank you for your presentation, it was fantastic. I just wanted to touch on the homelessness element that you mentioned. So it seems to be the homelessness in San Francisco increases year on year the way that IPOs increase year on year. Mm-hmm. Have you seen any good examples of technology working towards providing solutions and support to the homelessness?
Not really. There's been people who have actually designed apps for homeless people to find resources because they all have cell phones. A couple of years ago that wasn't the case, but they generally all have cell phones. But I haven't seen that. And to be frank, my husband and I hated living in Silicon Valley. We ran from there, and we live in LA now. And it just wasn't a place that was ever going to value humans before technology. So we needed to save ourselves.
I think there was one more question down the front. I'll get the microphone.
Thank you for the talk. It was really great. You spoke about the digital detox and also about Silicon Valley CEOs sending their children to Montessori schools. So clearly the people who know the most about tech are the ones who use it the least, or that's how it seems. Could you say anything about the direction you think we're going to go? You just said you think tech will be more prolific in the future, but is there a chance that the right way to go is actually to use it less?
I think the pendulum is definitely swinging. There's more and more people going on detoxes off of social or just their phone. And I think we're seeing a lot more people wanting to gather in one place as humans in real life. And actually a number of startups in LA are focused on getting people together in real life and getting them off of the screens. So yeah, I think there's definitely much more of an appetite as the pendulum swings this way. And maybe then we'll get sick of seeing each other in person and go back to the phone.
And I think we'll have one final question in the middle. There's a hand up.
Hi, Raina, just over here. Hi. First of all, thank you so much for leading the way on ethics and technology. Bless you. I lead the public sector practice for a consultancy, and I'm implementing these practices right now for my customers. My favourite rule is have a diverse team, and in this country, the digital divide is definitely hurting and creating a division and gaps, and we're trying to close that gap, especially with our First Nations people. What advice can you impart on helping to bridge that gap with our First Nations people, especially when it comes to things like employment and opportunities for those?
So there's as we just discussed, there's a whole new crop of technologies that are in their infancy right now, and getting people trained on those before anyone else, they're going to have the advantage. So whoever has the knowledge first has the advantage. So maybe looking at a little further ahead as to what's down the line and giving them those skills instead of the skills of today could put them in a really great position for the future.
Thanks. And I think one final question is, and it probably comes to why, maybe the question each of you of why you've come out tonight to listen to Raina is that question, is that appetite for curiosity and to ask questions and to constantly check in, are there unintended consequences of what we're doing? And I think the call out that you've mentioned around actually through all of our networks and all the people we know is how can we continue this conversation that, Raina, you've presented tonight, and throwing the challenge out to all of us. And I'll end it with a tag about what would happen if we did it this way or that way. And I think it's really the essence of what we're trying to do for Melbourne Knowledge Week. So on behalf of the City of Melbourne, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.